Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
They didn't even have the decency to fire me properly. No dramatic confrontation, no box of personal belongings escorted by security, no speech about years of service or how the company wouldn't be here without me. Instead, I got a calendar invite titled Q2 Alignment Strategy, Mandatory. The kind of title that makes you check if you forgot to submit a report or piss someone off by hitting reply all too aggressively. So I walked into conference room C like a fool, with my notebook and a cup of gas station coffee that was colder than I expected and far more bitter than usual. Carl Bennett, my boss, or should I say former boss, was already sitting there, nervously stirring his tea with the same fake smile he used on clients when he wanted to hide the smell of something burning. "Hey, buddy," he said, like we were about to catch up over football and knock up my career. "Glad you could make it. This won't take long." You know what's funny? When someone tells you something won't take long, you suddenly realize just how much time you've given them over the years. I gave Carl over a decade. Birthdays missed, late nights spent fixing last-minute decks, once even skipped my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner to get a campaign live. And now, apparently, all that loyalty came with an expiration date. "We've been thinking a lot about the future," Carl said, and that's when I knew I was done. Not because of what he said, but because he was already avoiding eye contact. He kept glancing toward the glass door like he was waiting for someone else to save him from this conversation, or maybe to hand off the kill shot. "We're pivoting," he said, leaning into a more youth-focused approach. "You've been incredible, obviously, and your legacy here is, well, it speaks for itself." The glass door swung open right on cue, like someone had choreographed the damn thing. In walked Zane. I didn't know he was Zane yet, but I could smell the cologne and ego from across the room. 25, maybe. Tight black jeans, sneakers that probably cost more than my first car, a jawline sharp enough to slice deli meat, and the casual confidence of a guy who's never had to earn anything the hard way. "This is Zane," Carl said, standing up with way too much energy. "He'll be shadowing you for the next few weeks. He's got a strong digital presence and an incredible pulse on the younger demographic." Zane smiled like we were on a game show, and he'd just won a new car. "Hey man," he said, sticking out his hand like we were old college buddies. "Big fan of your campaigns. Seriously, mad respect." I shook his hand, nodded, and sat back down slowly, careful not to let the hot anger boiling in my stomach make it to my face. I've been in the game too long to let a rookie see me flinch. "So," Carl continued, his voice suddenly shifting into business mode, "you'll be helping Zane get up to speed. Show him the back-end systems, transfer your client contacts, walk him through the brand voice guides. Just so there's no disruption during the transition." The transition. That's what they were calling it now. I glanced at Zane, who was already tapping something into his phone, probably tweeting about mentoring an old legend or whatever self-congratulatory nonsense people like him say to their followers. I smiled, not because I was okay with any of this, but because I knew something they didn't. Zane didn't have a clue how things worked. He didn't know the difference between a brand promise and a PowerPoint font. He didn't know that the biggest client we had, Kellerman Foods, required hand-holding and last-minute mood boards every other Wednesday, or that the CEO's wife insisted on approving every holiday-themed campaign herself. And Carl? He'd just bet the entire marketing arm of the company on a guy whose greatest achievement to date was getting verified on social media. I nodded. Of course. Happy to help. And I was. Genuinely. But not for the reasons they thought. That afternoon, I started the handoff. Walked Zane through the analytics dashboards, showed him where we tracked client deliverables, even let him sit in on a creative review meeting. I kept my voice calm, my face neutral, and my notes detailed. I told him everything, but never all at once. I left out key parts, disguised essential details with vague terminology, let him believe he was absorbing wisdom when all he was really doing was drinking from a leaky faucet. I also started saving things. Emails, notes, screenshots of Slack messages. I began documenting not just Zane's screw-ups, which came fast and hard, but Carl's as well. Every time he skipped a necessary client check-in, every time he approved a half-baked plan just to impress the board, every time he praised Zane publicly while privately asking me to just clean this one up. "Will you?" They thought I'd go quietly. They thought I'd fade into the background, maybe take an early retirement or find some consulting gig where older guys go to slowly decay behind WeWork desks and ergonomic chairs. But here's the thing about being old school. We may not trend on Twitter, but we know where the bodies are buried. We remember the passwords, the client birthdays, the panic triggers, the hidden folders where past versions live. We remember the fires we put out without credit, and the flames we could have fanned but didn't. Until now. So yeah, I smiled. I handed Zane my logins. And then I waited. What would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back like this? Let me know, because this is where the real story starts. Zane's first official day as digital engagement lead started with him standing on a desk, literally, arms wide open like some startup messiah, shouting, "Let's disrupt some paradigms today," while half the team stared blankly and the other half tried not to make eye contact in case the cringe turned fatal. He strutted into the bullpen like he owned the place, fresh iced coffee in one hand, phone in the other, probably already streaming his arrival with a caption like, "First day in the war room. Legacy about to be rewritten." The kid talked fast, moved faster, and understood very little beyond follower counts and how things played on the algorithm. It took less than 3 hours for him to rename our internal project folders with hashtags instead of client names, which, as I predicted, broke the shared file links and crashed our campaign database for 2 whole departments. When asked what happened, Zane blinked and said, "Oh, my bad. I thought that was just, like, a naming vibe." That was the first real headache. By the end of the week, he had introduced 3 content ideation sprints, 2 of which resulted in 0 usable materials, but plenty of vague slides featuring stock photos of sunsets and bold white letters saying things like, "Authenticity is our currency." He held a brainstorming session that ran almost 2 hours and resulted in nothing but a TikTok script about how fun it is to work at our agency, which, ironically, no one who worked there found particularly fun anymore. Carl, of course, was eating it up. He sat in on Zane's meetings like a proud dad at a school recital, nodding along to every buzzword like he understood what the hell micro-influencer cross-pollination actually meant. I watched him laugh too hard at every joke, repeat Zane's catchphrases in board meetings like they were gospel, and refer to our new strategy as bold, youthful, and forward-facing. Meanwhile, the actual work, deliverables, timelines, budgets, client approvals, started falling apart like drywall in a hurricane. Kellerman Foods, our biggest account, missed a crucial product launch deadline because Zane pushed to ditch the traditional pitch deck in favor of a social-first campaign rollout, which he planned entirely on Instagram stories and promptly forgot to save. They were furious. I sat silently in the client call as their director of brand practically growled over the speakerphone, asking who the hell thought it was smart to replace a year-long engagement plan with a meme calendar. Carl tried to smooth things over with corporate speak and shoulder shrugs, but Zane just blinked and said, "Look, sometimes chaos is the strategy." I took notes. Lots of them. Every email Zane sent, every calendar invite he missed, every approval he forgot to get, I logged. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I didn't need to. The kid was the walking definition of self-destruction. My job was just to observe. Occasionally, I'd ask harmless questions that nudged him toward his own pitfalls, like, "Did you remember to update the Google Drive permissions before sharing that link with the client?" Or, "Are you sure this video doesn't have copyright audio?" He'd wave me off with confidence, always too busy multitasking or live-streaming his thoughts to notice the ground disappearing beneath him. Carl started to grow nervous around week 3 when 2 more clients raised concerns and our creative director requested an urgent conversation about process breakdowns. I could see the worry in Carl's eyes, not because he regretted pushing me out, but because he realized he might have bet the future of the department on a guy who couldn't differentiate between a KPI and an emoji. That was around the time I started reshuffling folders. Not deleting, not falsifying, just reorganizing. I renamed some things, moved key files into archived concepts and drafts V6 folders, knowing Zane would never think to check there. It wasn't malicious, just careful curation. A little camouflage. Enough for someone unfamiliar with the terrain to get lost just long enough to make a mistake. And mistakes came faster than I could even document them. Flashbacks started hitting me hard those days. The kind that sneak up on you when you're sitting at your desk pretending to read a strategy report while your brain drifts off to some quiet, aching place. I remembered the time my daughter had her appendix removed and I took the client call from the hospital hallway instead of holding her hand. I remembered my wife calling me at 11 p.m. on our anniversary, alone in a restaurant because I stayed late to tweak a campaign for a pitch Carl ended up canceling anyway. I remembered my father's funeral, where I left awake early to answer emails. It all came rushing back. Every trade I made for this place. Every time I chose their deadlines over my life. And now? Now I was training a guy whose main professional skill was syncing his outfits with marketing trends. A guy who called our longest-standing client out of touch in a meeting because they didn't get his Gen Z wink-wink tone. I didn't get angry. Not visibly. I just nodded, smiled, and handed him the tools he asked for, like a patient bartender watching a frat kid pour whiskey into his cereal. I knew how this would end. He didn't. And Carl? Carl was too proud or too scared to admit he'd made a mistake. He was riding this bit all the way down, praying that maybe, just maybe, Zane would catch up before it all blew up. But Carl didn't know how close the fuse already was. Every late-night Slack message from the account managers, every "can you take a look at this before Zane sends it?" Every quiet apology from coworkers who used to avoid me and now suddenly needed advice, it all told me one thing. They didn't just replace me. They built a tower of kindling and handed the matches to a guy who thought fire was just a metaphor. And I was just getting comfortable watching the smoke. There's a certain kind of silence that falls over a man when he realizes the disaster he predicted is finally, inevitably unfolding right in front of him, and for once, he doesn't have to be the one cleaning it up. It's not the kind of quiet you get in a peaceful moment. It's the kind that buzzes with satisfaction just under the skin, like a secret you've kept too long that's finally being told by someone else, only they don't even realize it yet. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table in sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, bourbon in my coffee and laptop open, the company's Zoom invite glowing on the screen like a beacon of beautiful incoming chaos. The meeting was set for 10 sharp. The client, Kellerman Foods, our crown jewel account, responsible for over $3 million a year in retainer fees and a good chunk of Carl's quarterly bonus. The pitch was for their new national product rollout, a cross-platform marketing push we'd been warming up to for over 6 months. Except now it was Zane's show. Carl had made it painfully clear, in an all-hands meeting that smelled like a TED Talk and a eulogy had a baby, that this was the dawn of a new era of agile innovation. Zane was going to lead the pitch solo, which Carl insisted was a strategic trust play. He even said the word torch passing, like we were in a goddamn Olympic ceremony instead of a corporate death march. Zane had spent the past week preparing the presentation, and by preparing, I mean recording TikToks of himself rehearsing lines like "Consumer journey starts with shared emotion" and rebranding the campaign under the theme "Snack Boldly," which he said tested well with younger appetites. I had no idea what that meant, and apparently neither did anyone else on the team who looked at his draft decks and silently nodded to avoid being dragged into the sinking ship. I logged in 5 minutes early, camera off, mic muted, sitting back with my drink and a half-smile curling behind the rim of my coffee mug. Carl and Zane were already in the virtual room, fiddling with screen share settings while the Kellerman execs slowly trickled in suit-clad men and women who'd built their careers on discipline, metrics, and proven returns. Not the type to clap for hashtag slogans. Zane started strong, or at least he thought he did. He welcomed everyone with a grin, cracked a joke about snack silence during quarantine, and promised to take us on a digital flavor journey. I think I saw one of the Kellerman VPs blink twice in disbelief. Then he clicked to open the deck, and nothing happened. He fumbled for a second, cursed under his breath, which, of course, wasn't muted, and then tried again. Still nothing. Then the screen froze entirely, showing half a JPEG of a bag of chips and the words "Snack Boldly" in Comic Sans stretched out like a low-budget flyer from a gas station window. I choked on my coffee and had to mute my laughter behind a napkin. Carl jumped in, trying to cover. "Looks like we're having a brief technical hiccup," he said, his voice an octave higher than usual, eyes darting off camera like he was searching for divine intervention. After a few painful seconds, Zane managed to pull up the campaign video, except it was the wrong file. Instead of the polished cut the agency editor had sent over, he played the raw, unedited footage, complete with green screens, cue card flubs, and a clip of him muttering "this is stupid" right before the camera cut. Dead silence followed. Then the Kellerman director of marketing, a woman named Angela I'd worked with for 9 years, leaned forward and said, "Is this a joke?" Her voice was flat, unimpressed, and dangerous in that way only a client with too much money and too little patience can be. Zane looked stunned, like he'd just been punched in the soul. He stammered, blamed legacy systems, claimed someone must have uploaded the wrong file, and then had the gall to say, "Honestly, this is why we need to rethink these outdated platforms." I swear I saw Carl physically shrink in his seat. Angela didn't miss a beat. She clicked her mic on and said, "We were promised a comprehensive brand strategy, not a YouTube prank show." Then she left the call. One by one, the other Kellerman execs followed her out of the room like polite guests leaving a party after someone vomits in the punch bowl. When it was over, Carl sat frozen, mouth slightly open like he wanted to say something but couldn't remember how to speak. Zane just stared at the screen like the pixels had betrayed him personally. Finally, Carl cleared his throat and muttered, "Let's regroup internally," before ending the call. I sat there a while, sipping from my mug, the bourbon finally warming its way through my chest in that perfect, smug kind of burn. No need to gloat. No need to send a message. They knew. Deep down, both of them knew. They'd let a boy play dress up with dynamite, and now they were surprised the house was smoking. I could have saved them, of course. Could have stepped in with a backup file or dropped a reminder about proper formatting or even sent a last-minute nudge before the call. But that wasn't my job anymore. My job now was watching the consequences they'd earned unfold without lifting a finger. That's what happens when you trade experience for hashtags. When you treat loyalty like a liability. As I closed my laptop, I poured myself another shot and let the quiet settle in around me. Not the cold kind, but the kind that wraps itself around your shoulders like an old friend. The one who always shows up after the fire's already out. There's more coming, of course. Carl's panic is just beginning. Zane's spiral hasn't even hit full speed yet. And me? I'm just getting started. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is the one where you don't even have to move. You just let the storm hit the people who insisted they could outrun the clouds. It didn't take long after the Kellerman fiasco for the cracks in Carl's kingdom to widen into canyons. Less than 48 hours later, my phone lit up with a message that made me laugh out loud. A text from Carl himself, polite but hollow, asking if I had a moment to chat, which in corporate language is about as honest as a handshake during a mugging. He framed it like a casual catch-up, like two old colleagues reconnecting over coffee, but I could smell the desperation through the screen, wrapped in faux-friendly punctuation and just enough vagueness to keep from sounding like a white flag. I didn't respond right away, of course. I let him sweat. I let him feel the silence press against his ego while the walls kept shifting around him. Only after the second message, this time a little less casual and a bit more pleading, did I agree to meet for a quick consult, a phrase that carried the exact weight of someone drowning who suddenly remembers you used to be a lifeguard. We met at a local steakhouse Carl used to frequent back when he could still expense $100 lunches without raising eyebrows. He was already there when I walked in, nervously scrolling his phone, his suit jacket hanging awkwardly off the back of the booth like it didn't quite belong to him anymore. His smile was too big and his handshake a touch too firm, the kind of grip a man uses when he's trying to prove he's still in control, even if the ground beneath him says otherwise. "Good to see you," he said, which was a lie, and I didn't bother pretending otherwise. He got to the point quickly. "Zane's been. Well, he's not exactly delivering what we need right now," Carl said, carefully choosing his words like he was avoiding landmines. "The board is starting to ask questions. Clients are restless. I was thinking maybe you could advise. Just for a bit. Informally. Help us right the ship." I nodded slowly, took a sip of water, and didn't speak. He kept going. "Look, we both know the situation wasn't ideal. Maybe I rushed some decisions. Maybe I underestimated how much you were holding together." That part almost made me laugh. Holding together. Like I'd just been a glorified janitor for his half-baked empire. But I let him talk. I let him sweat. Because while Carl was busy spinning his excuses, I had already been working. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been building a file. A quiet little collection of receipts, tucked away on a private drive with a name boring enough to avoid suspicion. It had started as a way to protect myself, a few Slack screenshots here, a couple of missed approvals there. But after the Kellerman mess, I dug deeper. I went through old emails, calendar invites, and budget spreadsheets I hadn't opened in months. I found inconsistencies. Numbers that didn't quite add up. Project line items that had been adjusted after invoices went out. Vendor payments that didn't match delivered services. And then I found it, a reimbursement for a client dinner that, according to the restaurant records, was actually a private event for Carl's golf buddies during a weekend the supposed client was in a different state entirely. And it wasn't just one. There were 4. For separate incidents where Carl had funneled company or client funds into what could only be described as creative accounting. Not huge sums, nothing that would make headlines, but enough to raise questions. Enough to make a compliance officer nervous. Enough to make a board member wonder how deep the route went. So, as Carl sat across from me, sweating through his collar and pretending this was a reunion instead of a reckoning, I let him believe I might help. I even asked a few innocent-sounding questions, like, how's the finance team holding up with all the backlogs? And you ever think about bringing back monthly client check-ins, while storing every evasive answer in the back of my mind like bullets in a chamber? By the end of lunch, he looked relieved. Grateful, even. He thanked me for being open, said he'd loop me in on some upcoming strategy sessions, and promised to make it worth my while. I smiled, shook his hand again, and watched him walk out the door like a man who still thought he'd won something. That night, I sent the file. Not to the board directly, that would have been too blunt, too easy to trace. No, I sent it to someone else. Someone who owed me a favor. A former colleague who'd landed in the internal audit department after their own rough stint under Carl's leadership. I labeled the folder for review only and included a polite note. Thought this might interest you. Quietly, if possible. The response came the next day. A simple thumbs up. Nothing more. But that was all I needed. By the end of the week, whispers had turned into formal questions. The finance team suddenly started pulling old expense reports. Compliance initiated a random sampling of client billing histories. And Carl? Carl stopped returning calls. Zane was still stumbling around, oblivious to the growing storm, trying to rebrand his failures as experiments and writing LinkedIn posts about navigating corporate friction with vision. But the truth was, he was already done. He just hadn't noticed yet. Carl's house of cards was starting to buckle, and the guy he'd picked to hold the roof up was too busy filming himself explaining synergy to notice the flames licking at the foundation. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic tweets or forward gossip to former coworkers. I just kept working quietly, stacking one stone at a time in the wall between me and whatever mess they were about to find themselves buried in. There's a kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from shouting, "I told you so," but from watching the pieces fall exactly where you knew they would, back when everyone else still thought the board was solid. The email announcing Carl's voluntary departure to pursue new opportunities hit inboxes on a Tuesday morning, buried between quarterly newsletter drafts and a last-minute invite to a company-wide wellness seminar no one would attend. It was brief, sterile, and so perfectly corporate it read like it had been pre-written by legal months ago, just waiting for the right scandal to stick. No fanfare, no farewell party, not even a photo montage in the breakroom slideshow. Just a line thanking him for his years of passionate leadership and visionary growth, which would have been laughable if it weren't so insulting. I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of surprise. I'd seen the signs weeks ago, the shifting meetings, the quiet HR lockouts, the audit trail growing teeth, but because, for the first time in over a decade, the empire he built from vanity, denial, and borrowed credit was finally cracking in public. And not because I'd taken a sledgehammer to it, but because I'd simply stepped back and let it collapse under its own weight. I didn't burn it down. I just let gravity do its job. The audit, from what I heard through the grapevine, uncovered enough irregularities to warrant a private meeting with the board, a legal review, and a temporary freeze on discretionary budgets across 3 departments. They stopped short of pressing charges, likely to avoid the PR mess. But it was enough to ensure Carl wouldn't be showing his face in any industry circles for a long time. His LinkedIn went dark 3 days later. Last I checked, his title still read Strategic Growth Consultant, which is usually code for unemployed and clinging to relevance. Zane didn't last much longer. About a week after Carl's quiet exit, Zane published one of those tone-deaf, overly polished lessons from failure posts on LinkedIn, the kind drenched in empty humility, filled with phrases like grateful for the opportunity, humbled by the journey, and looking forward to the next chapter. He wrapped it with a blurry selfie taken from inside a conference room and a quote misattributed to Steve Jobs. It might have landed softly if not for the comments section, which promptly exploded with screenshots, sarcastic responses, and a few brutally honest takes from ex-clients and anonymous coworkers who'd clearly had enough of the facade. Within 48 hours, the post went viral for all the wrong reasons. Marketing blogs picked it up as an example of everything wrong with performative leadership. Industry Reddit threads tore it apart, frame by frame, caption by caption. Someone even made a meme comparing him to the Fire Festival guy, complete with a photoshopped yacht and flaming Cheetos back. By Friday, Zane deleted the post, locked down his socials, and quietly updated his bio to freelance creator in transition, which, in my experience, usually means he's moved back in with his parents or is selling protein powder under a different name. And the company? Well, it didn't implode, but it bled. Kellerman officially pulled their account, citing irreconcilable creative differences, which is polite speak for, "We're done wasting time with you amateurs." Two other mid-sized clients soon followed, not in a dramatic storm but a slow, surgical extraction, budget cuts here, reduced scope there, until finally the retainer expired and no one asked for a renewal. Morale tanked. Turnover climbed. And behind the scenes, I heard whispers of another restructure, the kind that comes with pink slips folded neatly into manila envelopes. And that's when the call came. It was late afternoon, golden hour spilling through my home office window, the kind of lighting that makes everything feel just a bit more cinematic than real. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Angela, the director of marketing from Kellerman. The same one who'd walked out of Zane's disaster pitch without looking back. "Are you still consulting?" she asked, like the answer wasn't obvious. I said yes, without hesitation. We met 2 days later. No suits, no pitch deck, just coffee and conversation. She didn't ask about Carl or Zane or what exactly happened in those final months. Maybe she already knew, or maybe she just didn't care. She talked about building something better, smarter, with fewer buzzwords and more guts. She talked about loyalty, about integrity, and about remembering what the hell we're actually doing this for. I listened, nodded, and when she asked if I wanted to help, I said I was in. Not because I needed redemption or because I wanted revenge, but because, for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was on my terms. A week later, I walked past the old office building on my way to meet another client, the kind of walk you take when you don't need to go that way, but you do anyway, just to see what's left. The windows were still clean, the lobby still polished, the name still mounted in sleek silver letters by the door. But it felt different now. Smaller, quieter, like a theater after the last act, when the stage lights have dimmed and the crowd has filed out. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, watching a few new faces rush past the glass entrance, probably late for some meeting that didn't matter. I didn't smile exactly, but something close. Not joy, not pride, maybe just relief. Maybe just the satisfaction of knowing I survived it, that I saw the machine for what it was, and I got out before it crushed me entirely. Was it revenge? Maybe. Or maybe it was just balance being restored. Maybe I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped holding it up. And if they want to call that sabotage, let them. I call it freedom.